sandy, and slightly acid. Our team, still unhappily without Professor Alan Gemmell, who's not well enough to be with us yet, consists today of Fred Loads of Lancaster, Bill Sowerbutts of Ashton-under-Lyne, and Geoffrey Smith of Harrogate. And the first question comes from
Alice Chapman. I almost cry when peeling onions. What causes this, and can the team suggest any varieties that contain less of this emotive and often painful property?
Can we suggest some onions to stop poor Mrs. Chapman crying? Bill?
Well, I know there's supposed to be various ways you housewives can, cut onions and not have this criking syndrome. Underwater and a match in your mouth. A safety match, of course, it's got to be. And the fan on the extractor fan going. But I think there is an onion called Bedfordshire Champion, which used to be grown very commercially, not very far from here, which is quite mild, and it's supposed to have less of this explosive stuff that gets in your eyes and makes you cry. But one I've heard more recently is one called, I think it's a Dutch one, W-I-J-B-O. I wouldn't know how to pronounce that at all, Widgebo or something like that. It's Fenglobe, I think, another name. And this is one that you can buy as a set, which is supposed to be, it's fairly mild, and not very offensive in this explosive stuff that's given off.
It's a keeping one, does it keep?
It keeps very well, But to me, mind you, I don't do the cutting up in the kitchen, you see. I like an onion with some flavour in it, some bite in it. And a lot of our English onions really have very little flavour. They're all right in stews, but I like them with vinegar on, some real good vinegar.
The actual cause is a volatile oil. An onion is composed of layers, tunics. We call it, it's a tunicated bulb. Now in that tunic, you take an ordinary onion, for example, and this will interest exhibitors. The more tunics there are, the bigger the onion. Now if you want to grow a 5-pound onion, you've got to select the number of leaves and number of tunics very early in its life. You don't increase the number of tunics after they're first laid down, but what you do increase is the size of the cell. Now there's only a certain amount of this, you call it emotive substance, in each bulb. And you get another smaller onion with tiny little cells. It's going to be much stronger in there than it is in here. If you buy onions from foreign sources, Italian, Spanish, and all the rest of it grown in heat, then you'll find that the tunics are smaller, the concentration is greater. So, use English onions.
I think that everyone's dodged the issue of what it is. It's surely that the volatile oil is high on sulfur and low on oxygen. I think this would be the explanation. Could be you have a soft heart if it makes you weak, but peel them underwater, certainly. And I've grown this Widgebo, this onion. It's a very good flavour. It's not quite as good a flavour as Ailsa Craig, but surely too, in practical terms, the sort of soil you grow the onions on is the way you feed them, the sort of soil you grow them on, has an enormous influence on flavour. It has with tomatoes, it has with every crop. If you grow them hard with lots of potash, then you're going to get a strong flavoured onion. Tickle them up in the early stages with a little more nitrogen to get them up to about 1.5 pounds.
Well, the next question comes from
Ruth Wagstaff. Nearly 17 years ago, we planted a Prunus nigra to celebrate the birth of our first son. Now the tree and my son have grown beyond the realms of prophecy. Pruning advice, please.
advice wanted on how to prune a 17-year-old Prunus nigra.
And
Geoffrey.
I'm very glad that this actually is very easy. You can prune it almost any time. I wouldn't do it when the sap is really thumping up at this time of the year, but you can grow Prunus ceracifera nigra as a hedge. Makes a beautiful hedge. If anyone needs a hedge, a deciduous hedge admittedly, grow it alternate, 3 of the myrobalan green glow with Prunus ceracifera nigra, 5. 3 of the green and 5 of the purple, and it makes a beautiful tapestry hedge. But you can clip it, I would say, any time from May onwards. And it makes an awful amount of growth. Once you do clip it, you might even have to dehorn it completely to get it back within bounds. But don't prune it so you lose all the characteristic outline. Thin it out and shape it up and take care with it. Don't prune it with a saw just off to a general level. Prune it so you emphasize the characteristic outline of the bush. So you make it this lovely umbrella shape. And then you'll not spoil the tree and you'll have it within bounds.
Seeing that this is such an old tree, does it set plums?
No, not at all. It's about 20 feet high, 15 feet wide.
Have you clipped it at all? Have you ever clipped it?
Only lower branches because
Is the stain in the wood? Is there a stain, a purple stain in the wood when you clip it?
Not that I have noticed.
It's not Niagara then, is it?
No, you see, true Niagara should set, an established tree should set some yellowish plums. It's a Canada plum. It's such a vast family, this, but I think basically, yes, Jeff's all right on pruning. If it's this height now, what height was it? I've forgotten.
20 feet.
Oh, I
20
would
feet
forget
high
about-
and 15 feet wide.
I would forget
Enormous.
about any pruning, except you have removed the lower branches so you can get under for mowing or whatever.
Yeah.
I would just let it go up to the heavens and forget all about it. I would really, because you're going to want danger money getting up there anyway. I really would forget it.
It's rather difficult because it is overhanging the pavement, and we have to sort of think in these terms that it is more or less.
Yeah, but it's
outside the
not
gate.
getting in the way of traffic at all.
No, just lower branches. We have to.
You'll have to take off the lower branches so the
Otherwise-
bowl will extend.
Yes, otherwise we
I
won't
think
get
that I would leave it alone after that.
It'd look lovely cut straight up by the fence and allowed to, straight up by the fence on one side and allowed to hang over on your side. That would be the way to do it. And then if necessary, cut it the other side the next year. You can butcher it, it won't mind in the slightest, not in the slightest.
You've had some good advice. What I would like to know is, why did you pick this particular tree to celebrate the birth of a son?
Well, it's a very good question. We picked this tree, and it was a Prunus nigra, definitely on the label. We picked it because it flowered on my son's birthday, which is May the 3rd. I might add that last year it flowered in January, but it should flower on May the 3rd, which is our son's birthday, and it lasts about a week.
Well, that's
why we picked this tree.
most interesting. But if I'm pruning any of the Prunus family, and I've got to prune them severely, I'll prune mine in July.
May we borrow you in July, please?
Yes, I'd be delighted to hear the rest of the history.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Wagstaff. And the next question comes from...
Donald Powell. Many gardeners grow rhododendrons, azaleas and camellias and do not have access to rainwater for watering purposes during dry weather. In this event, is it permissible to use tap water which contains a small percentage of lime and other inorganic chemicals?
Bill?
I would say not really. Depending on the percentage of lime in that water, it could be harmful to a lot of calcifuge plants. And, rhododendrons, azaleas, heaths and the like, hydrangeas even might be affected with any artificial watering. And you should use, say, when you're defrosting the fridge, that sort of ice melted down would be perfectly safe. And if you had a greenhouse or say off the, the top of your house or kitchen or whatever with a tub, okay, and something on top of the tub so that it'll not get algae growing, that sort of water would be safe. Tap water, if lime in it, would be unsafe or tend to be unsafe.
I think that I would suggest that better your lime water than no water at all, and I would compromise by saying that if every fortnight you put a teaspoonful of sulfate of ammonia in, as long as it didn't go on too long, you'd be fine. You'd be feeding the plant nitrogen as well as keeping it alive, because if you deprive it entirely of water in times of drought, then your plant will die. It certainly won't die with 1 or 2 waterings with lime water. And then if you get chlorosis, go along to your local horticultural sundryman, buy a little sachet of this chelated iron and put a dip of that in the water, and you'll restore the balance straight away. Better lime water than no water at all.
One of the best ways you can help is to mulch and mulch early with as much organic matter as you can, leaves and all the rest of it. And if blackbirds are a trouble, then, well, you'll have to put some wire netting down to keep the birds off. If you're going to water, and you're going to water with limey water, the best way that I have found is to water underneath the plant. Now, water will rise, but lime never does. If you put water on the surface, then it will carry the lime down. But if you put water underneath, the water will rise by capillarity, and it will not carry lime with it. And you know, originally, particularly in your own garden, you've planted a plant, you've planted a rhododendron, and you've dug out a hole. So all the way around, it will be fairly hard, and this will remain a container, particularly for rhododendrons and azaleas, for a very long time, especially if there's lime in it, and you put peat in the hole. So what you do, you literally refill the old hole, which may be 10 years old. I can still find the old holes in my garden, 10 years old, and I fill them up from underneath.
A mound of compost in, you're actually taking the soil you've grown them in away each year. And
Only round the bowl or the mound where I plant them.
it's funny, I don't know how you've got away with this.
You must have green fingers.
Yes, you've also got
A green suit on.
And you've also got the look of the devil, I would say. And yet he hasn't got horns and a tail, has he?
But he can grow cucumbers.
I'm surprised that you've got away with it. You don't water the soil with a fungicide at all.
No.
Man, you're worse than a Lancashireman.
How many years have you grown cucumbers successfully with
Three.
this technique?
3 years.
3 on the same side.
And they've done perfectly well.
Yes, I was selling them to the greengrocer last year.
I would water if I
Probably
go.
does come from York.
I was going to.
Dorset.
If I told you to water the soil with a fungicide, things would probably go wrong. But I'm surprised that you haven't got a build-up of a disease like canker, for instance. And I'm even more surprised that you haven't got a build-up of pests.
Yeah, but he hasn't. They've done well.
And they've done well. But so what do we say? I would say continue, and may the blessing of Allah go with you.
I think I would do the same. I would think, say, if you went to the racetrack, the dog racetrack, there was 5 dogs, and you kept backing number 2, and number 2 kept winning. I would keep backing it until number 2 didn't win.
Well, now, having sorted all that out, I'm sure you must do something fresh, because your mounds would disappear if you didn't add to them. So do you add to your mounds of rubbish?
No, I take out a spit where the last year's mound was, put in a nice new spit.
That's right, you
And
put in a
leave
new
that.
spit.
Yes.
All right, you've started
Yes.
a new spit.
Yes.
Right, then you've got to put a new top on, haven't you?
In the immediate vicinity, not more than a foot wide. So.
Yeah, but you've then
right,
got to
yes.
put a new topping of new soil on.
But with soil from the frame.
Yeah, well, it's all right. You've taken it from lower down, you see. So you've changed everything. You're just kidding us, you know. I mean, all you are doing is within the frame, and presumably during the winter time you take the lights off, and it just gets frozen, and it's left to God and Providence until you want it again for cucumbers.
No, it's half full of lettuce at the moment.
Yeah. In other words, you're cultivating it.
Your practice, yes, works for you, but please, if anyone's contemplating growing cucumbers, you make up a nice, rich mound of partially rotted horse manure, put about 6 inches of soil on top, plant your cucumbers, shut them up, shade them, put a little ring of quicklime round them to stop them getting neck rot. And I would almost guarantee that way you'll grow cucumbers.
The criteria is, do you get the results? Okay. You're risking danger. You're risking danger every time you cross the road, but you don't expect to be knocked down.
So carry on, Mr. Charles,
Yeah.
seems to be the message. And the next question comes from...
G. Dunkley. My garden is a new one. Consists of very fine sandy soil, which turns to dust in dry weather. It is very acid. The new vegetable garden has never been fed, and I'm wondering how to get the soil in really good heart. Is there any limit to the amount of manure that can be dug in? Is there any special value in green manure?
How would you treat a very fine sandy soil which turns to dust in dry weather and is very acid? Fred?
Well, our friend is wondering how to get it in good heart, so am I. Because this is a soil which will take anything more than your pocket can afford. And it's a garden, it's a sort of garden, well, I'd move out of it if I could. It's all right every 10th year when it's a wet year. Otherwise, you've got to work. And I would never dig this garden. I would merely put any organic matter I had on the surface. I would mulch it. All right, you would turn the soil over if you're growing potatoes or anything like that. But mulch the surface and If it's a fairly large one, then I would have at least a quarter of it down every year to some form of green manure, such as, well, you can use rape, mustard, and vetches. Of the three, I would prefer vetches. Grow a good crop of annual grass and vetches, and dig this in, and I think it's the only way you could afford to keep this going.
Most gardens, small gardens, aren't big enough to be able to put a lot of them down to green manure. If there's room, certainly. I would never dig a light soil. I would use the veganic gardening technique and blanket mulch on top, and I wouldn't put it on until almost this time of the year, because a thin soil, a thin acid soil, will eat compost as if it was being burnt. And what you've got to do is to build up that humic layer, that layer of organic matter in the surface of the soil, because not only are you going to lose moisture very quickly, but there's nothing there to hold the fertilizer residues. The great thing about a clay soil, and that's the only virtue I can see in a clay soil, it's the most killing thing. I worked one for 20 years, but the clay fraction holds A, the moisture, and B, the minerals, the fertilizers you put on against leaching.
In a sandy soil, let's say something in its favour, it does warm up quickly. It's an early soil. Why is it early? Because there's more air in it than water. In a wet clay soil, there's more water than air. So I agree on the composting, but as regards not digging at all, I wouldn't agree. I think get some compost or old muck, if you can get it, turn into that soil, and it will be an early soil, and you work with it, and it'll give you good crops if you look after it.
All right, Mr. Dunkley, thank you very much. All right, who's next?
Gladys King. Last season, my Japonica Sidonia had 21 fruits, but when almost ripe, they suddenly dried up, all hard and wrinkled, and my hopes of jars of jelly were dashed. Could the team please tell me the reason?
Why should the fruits of a Japonica Sidonia suddenly dry up? Geoffrey?
I've got it. Do you know which variety this is?
Well, no. We had a plant given us 5 years ago, and it was about 18 months old then.
I've got some of the named varieties that are grown entirely for the flowers don't produce very good fruit. But the one thing that quinces,
Yes.
which this is the quince,
Well,
of course. The
we
one
do-
thing,
Sorry. We do know from the history of it that it is the variety where you can make the quince jam.
the beautiful big fruits that
Yes.
make this lovely amber-coloured jelly.
And last year was the 3rd year of it fruiting.
We grew quinces to make jelly of, and the thing that we were continually reminded about was that you must mulch them and you must water them. The one thing that they won't stand is drought. Immediately you get dry conditions at the root, the fruit stops developing and it shrivels up. And I suspect that A, you haven't mulched the tree,
Yes.
and B, that you haven't watered it.
Well, it was very dry last year, and we put the lawn mowings on it and kept it watered as best we could.
You need deep down what we call knee-deep watering in gardening. The soil needs to be soaked. It won't stand bad drainage. This is not the impression I want to give. It needs a moist, humus-rich soil. And the other thing that we used to do was to mix sulfate of potash up in water and apply that just when the flowers were dropping.
Certain it's shortage of water. Mine did the same last year. But they'd be lovely for your drawers.
The perfume from them, I'll take it, you mean?
I was going to say it's a bit
No, I-
uncomfortable when you sit down.
I mean, literally.
I did notice that.
Yeah, I mean, literally, put them in your drawers. This is the second best use for them amongst the sheets.
Yes.
They're marvellous.
They went really hard, isn't
Yes,
it?
well,
Bullets.
they won't go rotten then. If you can't use them one way, use them another.
Thank you. That's worth knowing.
It's a
anyway.
very strong odour, as you know, and you could never, for that reason, you never store them with apples, or else the apples will take like quinces, and the quinces will take
Put them
like,
amongst
taste
your
like
sheets.
firewood.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. King. And the next question from?
Beatrice Hardy. Some Achomenes potted up last season made good top growth, but with no sign of a flower. Why? And what treatment should the little tubers receive after the tops have dried off?
So Machimenes, potted up last season, made good top growth, but no sign of a flower. Why? Fred?
Well, this rather puzzles me because this is a comparatively easy plant to do. You can propagate it in a number of ways. Now, will you tell me how you started off your little worms?
Well, just potted them up in some potting compost.
Right, you'd grown them the previous year.
Yes.
You dried them off, and they hadn't broken up too badly. They break up sometimes in your hand.
Yes, no, they were
And
all
you've
right.
saved them carefully.
Yes.
And you've put them in the top of a pot, maybe what, an inch down?
Just, yes, about that.
Then what did you do with them in terms of warmth?
Well, they're standing on a window that don't get an awful lot of sun until the evening, and they're in a room where there's a storage heater.
So, in other words, they don't get a lot of intense heat to start them off. They
No.
come on nice and gradually.
That's right.
You know, like everything else around them
Yes.
coming on. What I was afraid of was
They're in
that
the lounge.
Yes. What I was afraid of was that they might have been induced to start with extra warmth, like putting them near a radiator or...
Well, they were fairly near the storage
Now,
heater.
this is what I was afraid of. You see, they need a bit of heat to start them off, and what I'm afraid is that they were forming, you see, they form the flower buds very soon, and what I'm afraid of is they got this check to the growth. Whilst they were still spurting on, the flower buds aborted, and then they never made them again.
I see.
I think your mistake was trying to accelerate them by putting them a bit too close to start them off in the first place. What do you think, Geoffrey?
Well, I've got a feeling that Fred's right, that if you push them just a little bit too
Well, that's
hard,
a
the
relief,
flower
isn't it?
buds abort. And when he's talking sense, I agree with him. It's only when he... the other point, the other thing that I wonder about is how did you store them? This is the critical factor in so many things, and the simplest way that we used to... Immediately you asked this question, my mind went back to a potting shed, back 30 years, believe it or not, and we used to have these to dress out, as we called it, and we stored them in the pots that they were grown in, but the pots were laid on the side. In other words, they were completely dry, completely ripened. All the goodness went back in.
Yes,
And
well,
then-
I was asking you how to...
Well, that's
do
the way I would
That
do
is
it.
the way
Leave
we
them
do
in
it.
the pots, dry them off, store the pots on the side so they get no atmospheric humidity in.
This is the one that's known in our part of the world as the hot water plant.
Yes,
And to
that is-
start it off into growth, the old tubers in the pot, which have been laid on the side, as Geoffrey said, you plunge that pot, the lot, in hot water for about half an hour. Really hot water, not boiling, just off the boil for a good half hour. And that'll start them off into growth like lightning, and they'll flower like mad.
It did start me into growth as well, I tell you.
This, I'm pretty sure, this is the plant that is commonly called the hot water plant.
Yes,
It
you're
is.
absolutely right,
Yeah.
Bill. Yes, I'd forgotten that. Yes, this is absolutely right.
Thank you, Mrs. Hardy. And I'm afraid this is the last question. It comes from...
Dora Elliott. How is a new potato strain obtained? Is it possible for any gardener to obtain their own?
How is a new strain of potato obtained? Geoffrey?
Well, if you look at your potato rows, just when they're coming into flower, you'll see there's a lot of little things like green tomatoes on them. And what you do is you let those ripen, and you take the seed, and it's just like getting married when you sow that seed. You don't know what you're going to get. Could be something good, could be something hopeless. But all you do is let the little green potato apples ripen, and you sow the seed from them, and they grow. If you sow the seed, it's like growing dahlias from seed. They will produce tubers of a sort, not much the first year, at least I've never had any luck, but certainly the second year. And you have no idea whether it's going... This is going on all the time in the commercial world. The whole of the commercial world is experimenting with food-producing crops, and potatoes are one of the top items. Most of the potato breeding is done in the west coast, where the aphids can't fly because they have the humidity or the wind, and you don't get any vectoring of virus diseases. Virus diseases, to be transmitted, must pass through the sap stream of Mysis persicae, the potato aphis, the peach aphis. And it injects this infected sap into a healthy potato like your seedling, and that's it, finished, which is why you get new seed potatoes every year. But you can grow them from seed, and the little green tomatoes. Marvellous fun, but I don't know what you'll get from it.
I think there should be some slight qualification from that, because there are quite a lot of potatoes. They're all hybrids. A lot of them are sterile hybrids. They do not flower, or if they flower, they don't set these potato apples. Some hardly flower at all, but a lot of varieties do flower and set these potato apples, from which seeds are produced. And this is a method, as Geoffrey says, of introducing new varieties. The hybrid is donor, and this is the way new varieties are introduced, through these potato apples, which incidentally are very, very fractionally...
Cook and without being rude, I think you're about in my league. We don't even bother to start cereals.
No. Thank you.
SER.
That's right.
Why do we bring him along?
Right.
To divide clumps of snowdrops. Time to do it is when they're green, when they're passing out of flower. Dig them up carefully with a small hand fork, break them carefully, and replant in about 6 inches apart in the form of a triangle, little clumps like that, all about the garden, and that'll keep her busy for a bit.
Geoffrey?
Well, I am convinced that this is the time of the year when it's best to move evergreens. I don't like autumn planting. I let the nurseryman look after them over the autumn, and then I get them in the spring at this time of the year when I'm fairly sure that they're going to survive. It's a marvellous time to be in the garden. It's the best time, as far as I'm concerned, to transplant evergreens. Keep them damp over the leaves and you'll be fine.
Bill?
I'm thinking of vines. A beautiful thing in this country for a cold greenhouse, no heat required whatsoever. But at this time of the year, they're really making growth and plenty. They grow overnight to a couple of inches. They're really off. And I think the point I'm trying to make is this, that from each spur, you need 2, 3, or even 4 growths. Take them all out except the strongest. When the strongest produce a flower, the bunch, stop it at 2 leaves past that bunch. And then those flowers will have a chance to set.
And that's all for today. We've been the guests of the Bramptons Spencer Club for the over 60s. Next week we're in Aberystwyth with the Cardigan Horticultural Society. So until then, from me, on behalf of Fred Loades, Bill Sowerbutts and Geoffrey Smith, good afternoon.
That recording of Gardener's Question Time was introduced by Michael Barratt and produced by Kenneth Ford of our Manchester Agricultural Department.
Radio 4 VHF. You should retune to Radio 4 medium wave if you'd like to hear afternoon theatre. It's Cause Célèbre, Terence Rattigan's first play for radio, which is based on the sensational Rattenbury murder case in 1939. An advertisement placed in a local newspaper